In 1785, a single law quietly sliced a huge portion of what would become the United States into perfect 1-mile squares. Not for beauty, not to help you get around, but to sell the land faster than anyone in history had ever sold land before. You see it every day and barely notice it. Straight streets, numbered avenues, right angles as far as the eye can see. The American grid feels like the obvious way to build a city, the simple, logical default. And most of us assume it was designed this way for us, the people who live here, to make getting from one place to another easy. But that's the surface story. The real reason so many American cities look like a checkerboard has been mostly forgotten, and it has almost nothing to do with making your commute simple. It's a story about debt, about desperation, and about a young country that figured out how to turn dirt into cash by drawing lines on a map. The grid wasn't built to be a city, it was built to be a product, and you are living inside it. To see how this started, go back to 1682 and a man named William Penn. When the English king handed Penn an enormous stretch of land in the New World, Penn had both a dream and a problem to solve. His dream was a green country town, a clean, open, healthy place that would be the opposite of the cramped, filthy, disease-ridden cities back in Europe. He had watched London burn in the Great Fire, and he wanted wide streets and spread out lots so fire and plague couldn't tear through his city the same way. So, Penn had his surveyor lay out Philadelphia on a clean grid. Straight streets crossing at right angles, a neat pattern of blocks between two rivers. On paper, it looked like pure idealism, but tucked inside that idealism was a very clever piece of business. A grid is easy to measure, it's easy to divide, and most importantly, it's easy to sell. When every lot is a tidy rectangle, the property lines are obvious, the parcels are uniform, and there are no arguments about where one person's land ends and another's begins. An investor back in England could buy a piece of a city he had never seen, just by pointing at a square on a map, and trust that the square was real, and it worked. Philadelphia grew fast. By the middle of the 1700s, it had become the largest city in the American colonies, a thriving hub of trade and population. That success sent a powerful message to everyone watching. The grid wasn't just orderly. The grid was a formula. It was cheap, it was repeatable, and it made money. Here's what makes that early experiment so important, though. Penn proved you could use a grid to build and sell a single city. But the people who came after him would take that same simple idea and aim it at something almost unimaginably bigger. They wouldn't just use the grid to build a town. They would use it to try and save an entire nation from collapse. After the Revolutionary War, the brand new United States was in serious trouble. The country had won its independence, but it had done so by borrowing heavily, and now it was buried in debt with almost no way to pay it back. Under the system in place at the time, the national government couldn't simply impose taxes on its citizens to raise money. It was a country that had just been born and was already nearly broke. But the young nation did have one enormous asset. To the west sat a vast, sprawling expanse of land, millions of acres stretching toward the horizon. If the government could sell that land, it could turn all that space into the cash it desperately needed. This is where Thomas Jefferson and other leaders saw an opening. The land could be the answer to the country's money problems. There was just one obstacle. How do you sell an area that enormous, quickly, cleanly, and without endless fighting over who owns what? The old way of measuring land was a mess. It was called metes and bounds, and it described property using whatever happened to be lying around in nature. A boundary might run from a particular oak tree down to a creek, over to a big rock, and back to a fence post. The problem is obvious once you picture it. Trees get cut down, streams dry up or shift, rocks get moved. So these descriptions led to constant confusion and lawsuits, with neighbors arguing for years over exactly where one farm stopped and the next one started. That was no way to run what was about to become one of the largest land sales in human history. So in 1785, the government passed something called the Land Ordinance of 1785. It set up a completely new system for surveying and selling the western lands. Instead of relying on trees and creeks, the country would be carved up into a giant, precise geometric grid. The plan divided the land into square townships, each one 6 miles on every side. Every township was then split into 36 smaller squares, each one a single square mile, known as a section. And each of those sections could be sold and then divided again into even smaller pieces, all with clean, predictable, mathematical edges. Think about what that actually did. It took land, something messy and full of hills and rivers and forests, and it turned it into inventory. Uniform, countable units that could be listed, priced, and sold off like products in a catalog. A square mile here, a square mile there. The system was built for speed above almost everything else. Surveyors could march across huge territories laying down their grid, often paying little attention to the actual shape of the land beneath them, treating mountains and valleys as if they were a flat, blank sheet of paper, because that was faster. This system didn't get stamped onto every corner of the country. The original colonies kept their older, more tangled layouts, and parts of the Southwest held onto patterns that predated the United States entirely. But across much of the Midwest and the lands opening up beyond it, this grid, known as the Public Land Survey System, became the dominant template. Fly over the middle of America today and you can still see it, that endless quilt of squares stretching to the horizon, the fingerprint of a law passed more than 2 centuries ago. The grid had become something far more than a street pattern. It had become the financial engine of a struggling young republic, a way to convert raw wilderness directly into the money that kept the country alive. And once the federal government had drawn this blueprint across the continent, a new and even more frantic chapter was about to begin. Because where the government saw a way to pay its debts, a whole generation of developers, dreamers, and speculators saw something else entirely. They saw a way to get rich. With the national grid stretched across the map, 19th century America threw itself into a building frenzy. New towns and cities sprang up at a breathless pace, and the grid was the perfect tool for the two forces driving the whole era: speed and speculation. Take Chicago. When the city was first laid out in 1830, the grid wasn't just about keeping things tidy. It was about money. The young settlement needed funds to help build the ambitious Illinois and Michigan Canal, a waterway meant to link the Great Lakes to the Mississippi River system. Selling land was how you raised that money, and a simple grid let developers map out and sell lots almost as fast as they could draw them. A real estate market appeared seemingly overnight. Chicago's growth was supercharged by other forces too, especially its position as a future railroad hub. But the grid was the tool that turned open prairie into sellable parcels at lightning speed. Then there's New York City. By the early 1800s, Manhattan was growing in a chaotic tangle, and city leaders wanted order. In 1811, a state commission imposed what became known as the Commissioner's Plan, laying down a relentless grid that marched up the island from roughly Houston Street all the way north to 155th Street. The reasoning behind it was strikingly blunt. The commissioners noted that plain, straight-sided, right-angled houses were the cheapest to build and the most convenient to live in. They mentioned other benefits too, like better traffic flow and improved public health. But the grid they chose plowed straight over the island's hills, streams, and existing property lines, flattening the natural landscape in the name of simple, profitable, easy-to-sell development. Then came the railroads, and they poured fuel on the fire. As railroad companies pushed across the continent, they were often granted huge tracts of land along their routes. To squeeze the most value out of that land, they needed to build towns fast and sell off the lots even faster. Their tool of choice was the same one Penn had used in Philadelphia: a simple, repeatable grid. While not every railroad town looked identical, many used nearly interchangeable layouts to cut costs and speed up settlement. They became thousands of small copies of the very same economic logic that had built Philadelphia and Chicago. Stamp down a grid, sell the squares, move on. The grid was cheap to survey, cheap to build on, and easy to sell. It was the plug-and-play answer for a nation in a hurry to grow and to get rich. So, what is it actually like to live inside this enormous real estate project? The honest answer is that the grid's legacy cuts both ways. On one side, many modern city planners genuinely admire the grid for benefits its creators may never have fully intended. A grid creates a tightly connected web of streets that spreads traffic across many routes, instead of funneling everyone onto a few clogged roads. the way some sprawling suburbs do with their endless cul-de-sacs. That same predictable pattern tends to be friendly to walking and to public transit. It's easy to know where you are, and it's easy to find your way around. But the grid was built first and foremost for economics and administration, and we live with the downsides of that priority too. Because the grid ignores the natural shape of the land, you sometimes end up with results that border on absurd. The most famous example is San Francisco, where an unyielding grid was draped over impossibly steep hills, leaving the city with streets so steep they are both a tourist attraction and a genuine hazard. The grid was designed to conquer the terrain, not to work with it. That same rigid uniformity can also give American cities a certain sameness, a block after block monotony. And when the automobile arrived, a machine the grid's 18th and 19th century designers could never have imagined that uniformity revealed new flaws. The grid spreads traffic out, but it also creates a huge number of intersections. And every intersection is a point where cars can collide. The system built for selling land was not built for the world that would later fill it. To be fair, the people drawing these grids did talk about order, fairness, and convenience, and they meant it. But again and again, the loudest voice in the room was money. Human-scaled, beautiful, landscape-respecting design tended to come second to building a system that was functional, fast, and above all, profitable to sell. So why do American cities use grid streets? The easy answer we all assume, that it's simply for easy navigation, turns out to be just the surface, a happy side effect, rather than the real reason. The true forgotten story is that the American grid is the physical fingerprint of a massive economic project. It was born from the need to sell a colony, scaled up to rescue a young nation from its debts, and then perfected to fuel a century of breakneck speculation and expansion. The straight lines and perfect right angles that define our cities aren't, at their heart, a monument to rational design. They are the permanent echo of a centuries-long land deal, a system built for speed and profit, not always for people. So the next time you find yourself standing on a perfectly straight American street, staring down a seemingly endless line of asphalt, remember what you're really looking at. You're not just standing in a city. You're standing on a piece of a product, a measured, numbered square of land that was surveyed, divided, and sold to help build a country. If this completely changed how you see the streets outside your window, do me a favor and hit that like button because it genuinely helps more people discover this channel. Subscribe so you don't miss what we dig into next. And if you've got a friend who will never look at a city map the same way again, share this with them. I'll see you in the next one.